Good day, macroeconomic students. The purpose of this brief video is to recap what we covered last night in class on the 28th of September and to explain student responsibilities for next week's class. So last night, we covered chapters 4 and 5, which was a broad view of the U.S. economy. And that included the functional and personal distribution of income. We talked about income inequality. We talked about personal consumption expenditures, durable goods, non-durable goods, and most of our money being spent on services. We talked about the corporate form of business and the two ideas that the corporate form of business can raise capital through issuing stocks or issuing debt through bonds. And we talked about the pros and cons of the corporate form of business. We concentrated a decent amount of our intellectual efforts on chapters 4 and 5 of talking about the role of government in a market-based system, including protecting private property and providing a legal system, maintaining competition, protecting consumers, labor, and environment. We spent a lot of time on point D here, reallocating resources. We discussed what is a market inefficiency, aka negative or positive externality. So negative externalities cause spillover costs. Positive externalities can provide spillover benefits, and we talked about the role of government in reallocating resources when a market is not leading to or providing the most efficient outcome. The quiz for this week concentrates on this particular idea. We talked about the role of government in providing public goods such as interstate highways and military, fire, safety, police, and emergency services. We talked about the role of government providing macroeconomic stability, and that will be the concentration of our second two-thirds of the course. Finally, we talked about the role of government in taxation and redistribution of income through transfer payments. We then focused our attention on international economics, discussing in some detail the four economic linkages of trade flows, imports versus exports. We talked about capital and labor flows, information technology flows, and financial flows. We discussed in detail what it means to have a balance of trade. We talked about measuring imports versus exports within a country. So, for instance, if the United States exports $2 trillion worth of goods and services and imports $2 trillion worth of goods and services over the same fiscal year, we have a balance of trade. Obviously, that will rarely, if ever, happen. So then we talked about trade surpluses versus trade deficits. The United States currently has a very large trade deficit. That is to say, net exports means imports exceed exports by roughly $660 billion last year. We talked about the idea that a nation needs to finance its trade deficit by either selling off real American assets or by borrowing. Then we talked about the economic rationale behind trade. We spent some time identifying the difference between Adam Smith and the absolute advantage versus Dave Ricardo and the comparative advantage idea. We talked about measuring comparative cost to determine why nations should trade. We looked at the benefits of specialization in trade. We defined and explained terms of trade, and we looked at graphically and numerically measuring the gains from trade. Then we talked about why sometimes nations will erect trade barriers and the type of trade barriers they will erect. And then we talked about the idea that sometimes trade causes or creates what's called macroeconomic winners versus microeconomic losers. Okay, so next week we will review these principles. But if you need assistance between now and then, see it says students who need further assistance. Here's a video right there. It says related to international economics should watch the instructional video. That link will be on an email I sent through Canvas. What are you supposed to do for next week? Students have to do two things for next week. First, they have to watch these three videos. One is on the history of trade, about 10-12 minutes. The other two are short videos on the US dollar and the power of the US dollar. So please take detailed notes on these videos and be prepared to lead discussions at the beginning of class. In addition to watching the videos and preparing for discussion next week, students must complete the fourth quiz. Sorry this page got chopped off, but it will suffice. So there's an article attached to the message I sent through Canvas. We discussed the article briefly last night. Read the article, absorb the contents. Explain how the contents relate to the economics perspective that we've been discussing throughout the semester, the tools and concepts of market economics, and then most importantly, this one is in bold, the role government plays in correcting inefficiencies in a system of free market capitalism. All right? So it says there, students should concentrate their efforts on this last point. Read the article in bullet points, summarize answers to these three aspects of the economics perspective: market principles, and most importantly, the role government plays in correcting for market inefficiencies. If you have any questions, as always, reach out to me via text message. Have a great week.